Hello, this is Congressman Brad Sherman, live from Washington, D.C. We're about to start another one of our San Fernando Valley Town Hall meetings. A little logistics here first. I'd like everyone to write down the following phone number just in case we get disconnected. 855-920-0548. That's 855-920-0548. And that number will also be useful for our next town hall, which will be on April 27th. You can just dial in 855-920-0548 at 7 p.m. on the 27th of April. I'm going to cover a number of things, but only after our guest speaker. After our guest speaker, I'll make an opening statement. We'll take questions from the floor, and we'll tell you how you can get in the queue to ask those questions. We have some questions that were submitted in advance by those who went to our website, bradsherman.house.gov/townhall, and everyone will be able to give their answers to our survey questions simply by pushing the numbers on your phone. So everyone will be able to express their opinion on some controversial issues that face us right now. But our special guest speaker has a limited amount of time because she is the busiest ambassador in the world. She is the representative of Ukraine to the United States. This is her first and only congressional town hall. By way of background, I've been with the Ukrainian caucus for 15 years. I've been an advocate for all that time for us giving the defensive weapons to Ukraine that it needs. We haven't always been successful, and Ukraine went into this problem very undersupplied, but we're doing a lot to overcome that. Ambassador, we have on the line thousands of residents of the San Fernando Valley, and we also have quite a number of reporters from the Los Angeles media. So this is your chance to reach not only the San Fernando Valley, but the second largest megalopolis in the United States, Los Angeles. Just to introduce the ambassador, she has been here for about a year representing Ukraine. You couldn't have picked a more critical year. Prior to that, she served as Minister of Finance in the Ukrainian government. And I hope that she can tell us not only what's happening on the ground, perhaps a hint on what's happening in the negotiations in Istanbul, and, of course, to describe what Americans can do as individuals and as a nation. So with that, Ambassador Markarova, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Good evening to everyone, and it's such an honor and pleasure to talk directly to American people. It's also very appropriate because this is what we Ukrainians are fighting for right now, to be able to live as a democracy, to be able to choose our government and actually even change it on a regular basis, to be able to feel ourselves at home and aspire to be part of Europe, part of NATO, part of transatlantic community. And that civilizational choice that we have made repeatedly, Ukrainians, in the previous centuries, but also in 1991 when the Soviet Union broke up and 98% of Ukrainians voted to be independent. And we started building our own country, regained our independence, and we thought that we only have to focus on changing us, doing the reforms and, being who we are, the nation of peaceful bread growers. Unfortunately, in 2014, Russia attacked us for the first time, illegally annexed Crimea and part of Donetsk and Lugansk oblasts. And even though we used this 8 years after the first attack and first war to restore our territorial integrity only through diplomatic solutions, and we've done a lot with the United States reforming our country and actually building some of the areas from scratch. And I would like to thank the Ukrainian caucus, Congress, and personally to Congressman Sherman to be such a good partner and strategic friend, I would say, as we call the U.S., during all these years. And now, for 42 days, we are discussing something completely different. For 42 days, we live in the situation of full-fledged war, which Russia again waged on our country. But it's so different from anything we saw in 2014 or 15. And the scenes that you all see now on TV and that we live in Ukraine now through remind everyone about the World War II images. Our cities are being bombed and destroyed. Our schools are being destroyed. We already lost almost 40 universities, which are burned and destroyed to the ground. And just recently, after we were able to liberate some of the areas, the whole world watched in disbelief in all this video and footage of war crimes conducted by Russians in the suburbs of Kiev, Bucha, Irpin, all these little towns, which are now covered with dead bodies of civilians, tortured, killed, raped. Why is it important, and why I am talking to you now, and why we're asking the United States to once again be a leader in this friendship with us, but to help us? Because it's not only about Ukraine. Russian Federation is doing exactly what Nazi Germany did before and what any empire did before. They attacked sovereign country, neighboring country, and their intention is not only to attack us. Their intention is to attack anyone in the region who has a desire to be democratic. And if to be democratic is a threat, then none of us is safe. Plus, the very basis of the international rule of law, which we all believe and we all thought that we put together after the World War II, is shaken. Yes, 141 countries at the United Nations condemned it, but can we do something about it? Can we defend anyone? Can we ensure that if any country is attacked by the autocratic, bloodthirsty regime, that a peaceful country can defend itself? So I would like to thank American people for all the support we have been getting, and I would like to stress on what is it that we ask from the U.S. now, and that we would like the American people to help us. First, of course, with all the weapons, and we never asked for the boots on the ground. Our very motivated armed forces have been able not only not to fall, but effectively defend our country. But as Churchill said during the World War II, give us all the tools and we will do the job. Our armed forces and all the Ukrainians who are defending the country right now definitely are capable to do the job. We would like to defend and we will defend our country. We don't have any other home. We're also asking for sanctions. There should be punishment for this behavior. And we are very glad that the administration are rolling out the sanctions. And today we heard again strong sanctions, but these sanctions should even be stronger. And we believe that we have to completely isolate Russia and cut off it from the global financial system, the banking system, non-banking institutions, but also we're asking that all the cryptocurrency exchanges should stop conducting transactions. So there should be no business as usual, no normal business with Russia until it stops this behavior. And we're also asking for support. 4 million Ukrainians already fled the country, mostly women and children. 10 million Ukrainians are internally displaced because they are fleeing from the areas like Kharkiv, Mariupol, Chernihiv, all the places where there is the active day-to-day war, and they are fleeing to the safer place of Ukraine. So any support that you can provide, whether it's the making your position known or helping some Ukrainians who are in need or voicing your support for Congressman's initiatives to support Ukraine, all of this would be appreciated. Because ultimately, even though 9,000 kilometers are between Ukraine and the United States, we are much closer. We have the same spirit of entrepreneurship. We believe in freedom. And what unites us with the United States is that we are ready to fight for it. And we are fighting the fight that you Americans fought a couple of 100 years ago, but we also need to be successful in it because it's an existential issue for us, an existential issue for the security and freedom in Europe. So with that, I would like to again, thank you, Congressman, for this opportunity to join you on, as you rightfully said, my first and only town hall meeting, and for the opportunity to speak to your constituency. And also, it's very symbolic because the California National Guard is actually the main counterpart that for the previous many years helped to train our armed forces. So they are our brothers and sisters who prepared us for this very difficult moment, and we're very grateful for them too.
I've met some of the guardsmen who have worked with your soldiers, and were very impressed by what they saw in Ukraine. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. And the mailer that we sent out in advance of this identified that if people want to help with the relief efforts, they can go to usaid.gov, and there's a list of organizations. But ultimately, if I understand you, Ambassador, Ukrainians are not looking for free food in Poland. They're looking for the weapons and the sanctions that will allow them to reclaim their country and reclaim peace. So we ought to do everything we can to help individuals who are displaced, but ultimately to help a country regain its freedom.
Absolutely, Congressman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. I know how much you have to do, and I know it's 10:15 here in Washington, so I understand that you can't join us for the whole town hall, but we will be talking about Ukraine. And I want to tell everyone a little bit about how this town hall operates. If you'd like to be connected to us, you dial *3. If when you dial *3 you have a personal matter where you want my constituent service staff to help you out, they're available. And most people who dial *3 will want to be put in the queue so that they can ask a question that will be heard by thousands of Valley residents. We're going to be doing this until about 10 minutes after 8. And you can RSVP to our future town halls by going to bradsherman.house.gov. That's for House of Representatives, .house.gov. And you can submit a question for our next town hall. Our next town hall will be April 27th, and you'll soon be getting the mailer about that one. And in these town halls, we can talk about whatever subject relevant to Congress anybody brings up. But this town hall has a special emphasis on Ukraine, and the next one on April 27th will have a special emphasis on inflation and the cost of living. So I'll be, there are a number of people who have submitted questions in advance. We'll be taking some of those. We'll also take questions from the floor from some who dial *3 and want to be in the queue. I want to put in a pitch for my constituent service team that's on the line. We've got Scott Abrams, who heads that team, Kimberly Caceres, who joined us this year. And let me describe their work. Imagine a federal agency makes a mistake. It could happen. It could affect you. You call my team at 818-501-9200, and Scott or Kimberly will work hard. They'll solve your problem. And then Brad Sherman will take the credit. I think it's an excellent system. And our office is right there on Van Nuys Boulevard in America's best named city, Sherman Oaks. I'm here in Washington today. We have votes tomorrow. And on Friday, I'll be at the Valley Economic Alliance event in Burbank. I'm so pleased that I was able to get the president to sign into law $150,000 for the Valley Economic Alliance to be used for technical training and technical advice for small businesses in the San Fernando Valley, which are the lifeblood of our local economy. Let me comment a bit about the issue we've just discussed. You should know that Congress is stepping forward on this every day. Today, the House overwhelmingly passed the Ukraine Invasion, War Crimes Deterrence and Accountability Act, which sets up mechanisms and for us to work to document the war crimes being committed in Ukraine and who is responsible for them. And there's going to be controversy on the extent to which Putin himself is responsible. It is difficult in these trials, and there's a court in The Hague that has tried many of these cases from Kosovo and Bosnia, etc., to prove that the top leader actually ordered the vicious murders that we see on the ground. But one thing is undeniable, and that is Putin did violate international law and according to some analysis, commit a war crime simply by launching a war of aggression. There was no reason for this war, and there is only one person who is most responsible for launching it. In addition, today I introduced to Congress, along with 14 co-sponsors, the Russian Digital Asset Sanctions Compliance Act. This is a bill that I've crafted along with Senator Elizabeth Warren in the Senate. She introduced the bill in the Senate a couple of weeks ago. Russians own about 12% of all the cryptocurrency in the world, and that is very outsized for the size of their economy. There's no way the Russian economy is 12% of the world. And cryptocurrencies have been used by Iran, by North Korea, to evade U.S. sanctions. And so this bill is designed to give the president the authority to make sure that cryptocurrency can't be used to evade American sanctions on Russia. You heard the ambassador mention this is an important thing for us to do. The vice minister in the Ukrainian government in Kiev has also called upon us to do just this. And so I'm hoping that Elizabeth Warren and I are able to pass this legislation. Second, I want to put into context the choices that we have. We can do everything to help Ukraine, and we've done most but not all of what they've asked us to do. That can be expensive in terms of the value of the equipment, but it's at this point $1 or $2 billion so far. There are two competing, and we can impose every sanction. There are two competing considerations. One is to avoid anything that could escalate and get out of hand, even if it's just a 1% chance of starting a war that could even develop into something that was nuclear between the United States and Russia. And that's the reason why, for example, you don't see a single American soldier on the ground. That is why we have not imposed a no-fly zone over any part of Ukraine. A third consideration is the economic pain. We want to put Putin under pressure. We want to deprive him of the ability to wage this war. At the same time, pain is not just one way. Russia is a major oil exporter. It's the number 3 producer in the world, and we have not done absolutely everything that could be done. When I say we, especially the Europeans, have not done everything that can be done to turn off the spigot on Russian oil. There are certain banking sanctions that we could have imposed and that I'm trying to impose. And you run up against those who say, yes, but if the banks aren't a method for paying for the oil, then the Russians won't sell the oil. So you've got these three competing considerations: the liberty and life of Ukraine, the economic impact on Europe and the United States, and of course, making sure that nothing escalates. And as we deal with the individual policy proposals, all three of those will come into play. And finally, you will hear at least a few voices saying, well, all we need is diplomacy. And look, American diplomats are available to help mediate this in any way they can. The UN is available. Every Nobel Peace Prize winner is available. But those who say, well, all we need is diplomacy, some are often saying that to say, therefore, we shouldn't help Ukraine with the defensive weapons that it needs. And the fact is that diplomacy isn't going to work unless Ukraine is able to defend itself. Otherwise, you just need a diplomat to surrender the entire country to Putin. And when this war began, the weight of expert analysis was that Ukraine would fold in a week. It has not. Or at least that its conventional forces would fold in a week, and they would be reduced only to carrying on guerrilla operations. That's not what happened. The Ukrainians have inspired the world with their bravery and with their success, and frankly, the Russian forces have been far less effective than expected. So with that opening statement, let's open it up to a question on any subject from someone who's dialed *3. Don, who do we have in the queue?
We've got Zachary from Woodland Hills about Ukraine. Zachary, you should be on now.
Hi there. Thank you,
Hello.
Congressman, for taking my call, and thank you for the ambassador for coming on. My question is, I was an expat actually in Ukraine up until December, and I'm actually hosting 2 Ukrainians right now in LA. My first question is, why are we trickling in support for Ukraine in $100 million increments? And don't you think it would be better to give more sooner to save more lives and for Russian aggression? So to front load the support, especially now that they're repositioned.
Let me deal with that first. We are, of the classes of weapons that we are willing to provide, we are rushing those in as quickly as we can. Keep in mind, the kinds of weapons that we're giving Ukraine are kind of the underdog's weapons. We're not giving them so far tanks, so far as of last week, tanks. We're giving them anti-tank missiles. Well, that's often the weapon of choice for the side in of the military that doesn't have tanks or doesn't have many. So we are scrounging these up. We are buying them from our allies. And then on many weapon systems, we need Soviet weapons or even Russian weapons that the Ukrainians know how to use. And so we are buying those from our new allies in Eastern Europe, Poland and Slovakia, the Czech Republic, etc. So I don't think that we're moving slowly on the things we've decided to move on. The bigger issues are tanks and planes. There are those, and there's been a debate in the administration, is it too aggressive? Does it risk escalation to provide tanks? I do not think so. And I think we're going to see American-provided tanks to Ukraine soon. But that has been a debate, and so what slows us down is that internal debate. The other issue has been, and it's not just an issue for the U.S., but our European allies as well, how do you deliver planes? Now, the planes that Ukraine wants are Soviet-made MiGs. Poland has them. Poland is willing to give them up if we give them better planes. But the issue is the method of delivery. Poland said, we don't want these planes taking off from our territory and flying into the war zone, because that's as if our Air Force base is being used to stage a military attack on Russian forces. So what Poland did is they said, well, we'll let America have these planes delivered to Germany, which is in the exact opposite direction of Ukraine. And then it's up to the Americans to figure out how to turn these over to Ukraine. It is difficult to disassemble these planes and put them on trucks. It is thought to be perhaps too aggressive to have planes take off from NATO territory and fly into war. One wonders, is there a way to fly them into a Ukrainian base and have them land before they engage in any military activity, etc. So what is slow? We have not been slow when we decided what to do. Tanks and planes are the two issues. I do think you have a second question, but I'm going to limit you to just two questions, even though you have some expertise being so directly involved with Ukraine.
Sorry. Yeah. So the only issue with that is that I don't see how that prevents Bucha, and I wonder if Vladimir Putin is going through all the same mental gymnastics when he's deciding to invade. The second question is
he clearly is not using tactical nuclear weapons. He is there is some care there. I mean, I can't thank the man for not using tactical nuclear weapons, but both sides are aware that things in an extreme circumstance could get out of hand. Now, go ahead.
I have two Ukrainian friends here in Los Angeles who are on tourist visas. We're hosting them. We'd like to host more, but the Biden administration limited it to 100,000 family members. We have plenty of people in Woodland Hills throughout the San Fernando Valley who are ready to support Ukraine by housing the refugees during this crisis. And so the question is, can we do more in terms of allowing the people who are here to have special status and integrate into society, knowing that they want to go home, knowing that every day they say they want to go home to Ukraine, but obviously now is not a great time to do that. So they're doing more by being here, and they're helping our economy. These are talented people. I don't understand why Congress is not pushing for more refugees, even if it's temporary, right?
Well, the vast majority of Ukrainians want to stay in Ukraine. The second largest group want to stay as close to Ukraine as possible, and even within Poland want to stay in eastern Poland rather than western Poland, or want to stay in Poland even though the accommodations might be a little nicer in Germany. It's a richer country. We have set the number at 100,000. I don't think anywhere near that has come in. When we approach that number, then it'll be time to consider whether to add to that number. But our goal, if anything, is to applaud Ukrainians who have made more of their country free of Russian troops. If anything, there could be some repatriations to western and central Ukraine if things hold up for another few weeks the way they've been going the last couple of weeks. So I realize the 100,000 number is small compared to the 44 million Ukrainians, or even small to the almost 4 million Ukrainians who have left their country. But it's large compared to those we've let in so far, and I think Congress is ready to expand that number depending on the circumstances. And you're absolutely right. The Ukrainians, every country has a variety of people, but on balance, the Ukrainians who come here are hardworking and capable, and if they were temporarily part of our economy, would give it a boost. With that, let's go on to the next question.
Okay, Congressman, we have Arthur who has another question about Ukraine. Arthur, you should be live now.
Hi. First of all, thank you, Ms. Ambassador. Thank you, Congressman. I know there's talk about trying to expel Russia from the human rights area in the United Nations. Is it possible to take it a step further and expel Russia from the Security Council and perhaps the UN altogether?
As a practical matter, know. Russia has a veto in the Security Council, and that would be the body that would have to take such action. The UN is a mixture. It is majority non-democratic states, and there's a place for everybody, including the rogues of the world, to get together and talk. There should be a separate organization that should have more status and more gravitas than the United Nations, that should be limited to democratic countries. That doesn't really exist. It exists to some degree in the NATO organization, but that's just U.S. and Europe. It doesn't involve countries in Latin America and Asia. The G20 plays some of that role, and I think we may be able to exclude or minimize Russia's involvement in that. But yes, the UN has all this credibility as speaking for the world, but a very significant part of the voting power in the UN, both General Assembly and Security Council, is held by countries no more democratic than Russia or China. If you imagine an organization of good guys, you're imagining a new organization, and I think it makes sense to have one. Let's go on to, I'll actually go on to one of our written questions, and this was submitted by Scott McDonald in Burbank, and he wanted to ask this of the ambassador, but he's going to have to settle for me. Will Ukraine ever accept Russian acquisition of certain regions in eastern Ukraine, or is there a sense that armed resistance will continue until Russia fully retreats within her borders? At the beginning of this year, and since 2014, Russia has occupied the Crimean Peninsula and roughly half of two provinces. The ambassador called them oblasts, which is the technical or the Ukrainian word. Donetsk and Luhansk, I believe, are is my best effort to pronounce the names of those two provinces. Zelensky has pretty much indicated that he's willing to have a ceasefire in which Russia rolls back to the line that it had on the first day of February. And so that would leave Russia where it was at the beginning of this year, which is in occupation of those two areas of Ukraine. In addition, Zelensky has pretty much indicated that he would agree to a very formal renunciation of any possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. Ukraine would not be joining NATO anytime this decade, even if we hadn't seen this invasion. NATO was not about to invite Ukraine. If we have another question, I'll explain why. But so I think Zelensky will never, and the Ukrainian government will never formally accept Russian occupation of any part of Ukraine's territory, but they're certainly willing to stop fighting if there's a withdrawal to where we were on the early this year. Let's go on to the next question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman, we have a question about Medicare for All, actually, from Amnon from Sherman Oaks. Amnon, you should be on now.
Thank you. Good evening, Congressman.
Good evening.
In the mailer that you sent us, you talked about Medicare for All. So, first of all, I have two questions. And by the way, is the ambassador still with us or she left?
No. She had to go on.
She left. Okay. So my first question is with respect to Medicare for All. Does that mean
we're gonna limit people to one question? We have a huge queue. If you could just pick the better of your two.
Well, both of them are better. The Medicare for All, does that mean that the entire country, all the citizens will benefit from Medicare just like people over 65 years of age? That's my first question. And the second one, very, very quickly, if you don't mind, sir. Regrettably, we have several members of Congress who are abuse their privilege, and they vilify the United States. They vilify Israel, which is the best and most loyal ally of the United States, as we all know. They're anti-Semites and very, very hateful. I'm talking about the members of the so-called squad, Ilhan Omar's, Rashida Tlaib, and so on.
Let me deal briefly with both of those. Medicare for All is indeed a system, very much like we see in Canada, where the medical providers, the hospitals, continue to be in the private sector, but the payment system, instead of it being a mishmash of private pay, private insurance, and Medicare, is instead handled by Medicare. That would be a much more efficient system. It'd be a more comprehensive system. It would be a system where you did not have those people who are uninsured being charged double and triple what the insurance companies would pay for the same services. It's going to take us a long time to get there, but that would be the most efficient system to make sure everyone in the country is covered. As to anti-Israel sentiments in Congress, in most of the actions that come to a floor vote, we do have between 5 and 10 members of the Democratic Party who vote against helping Israel. You often get about 3 or 4 members of the Republican Party who vote the same way. And yet, I guess for somewhat different reasons. The Republicans who vote against helping Israel are more on the isolationist side, whereas the Democrats who, and it's like, it's 2 or 3% of our caucus, do attack Israel verbally, and they're wrong. But it's hard not to have a small fraction of members of Congress be wrong on this or that subject. I have, of course, been one of the strongest voices for the U.S.-Israel alliance over the last 26 years. With that, let's move toward one of our survey questions. And the first survey question is, should we accept the Polish plan in which Poland gives us MiGs and gives them in Germany, and then they take off from a U.S. Military base in Germany and head into the war zone? Obviously, this would help Ukraine. Obviously, this would be at least a little bit more involvement of NATO territory. It's different. You have a truck going from Poland to Ukraine. It's not engaged in military activities for hundreds of miles thereafter, and it's unloaded and whatever, versus you take off from NATO territory and fly into the war zone. So if you think we should accept Poland's offer and the system for delivery, press 1. If you think we shouldn't, press 2. And if you're undecided or unsure, please press 3. With that, let's go to the next question from the floor.
Okay, Congressman, back to Ukraine. Eva from Woodland Hills. Eva, you are on now.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Congressman Sherman. I very much appreciate your focus on Ukraine and the presence of Madam Ambassador with us. Mm-hmm. I am posting my question as your local space entrepreneur and investor whose son and our company has working employees in Ukraine. My son, Grant Blaisdell, is currently on the border of Ukraine and Poland with his 1 month, 4 weeks old son who was born exactly on the day of war, and his family. But my question aspires to your tradition of being particularly sensitive to the importance of space and aerospace industry. As a space entrepreneur, I support and I am in contact with Ukrainian space scientists and entrepreneurs. They represent vital IP, vital, important part of Ukrainian society, but also of strategic importance to us. They are afraid that their IP and science might fall into the hands of Russians. My question is very pragmatic, down to earth. I initiated a project to create in Woodland Hills, next to the former factory of Saturn V, Apollo 11. I would call it a safe zone, an incubator where we could house the remotely, virtually, or in real life space entrepreneurs, scientists, so we can give them a protection and continuation of their very important research. Would you support, or would you be willing to have a meeting to explore and the plan that we already put in place, both sitting here in Woodland Hills and also on the border of Ukraine and with the scientists that I collaborate with in Kiev?
Obviously, this is a complex matter in which you know the individual companies and the individuals involved, and we hope very much that the baby and family are doing fine. Ultimately, I want for the Ukraine what Ukraine had when it became independent, and certainly what, as a minimum, what it had at the beginning of this year. You bring up the idea that the Russians might be stealing IP, intellectual property, and I think Ukrainians know how to make sure that that doesn't fall into Russian hands. And in fact, the Russians have not taken any of Ukraine's major cities. The idea that smart aerospace engineers from Ukraine would be working in Woodland Hills makes me happy because I represent Woodland Hills, but I would be just as happy if we could get back to the world that Ukraine had at the beginning of this year, and Ukrainians could be our partners in companies doing business in Ukraine. So there may be particular immigration and licensing things that you'd want to talk to our constituent service team about. And look, this is the middle of a war, and the last couple of weeks it's been going well for Ukraine, and one can imagine that virtually all the displaced Ukrainians will be able to go back home. Perhaps need reconstruction, go back home to a place where some of the apartment buildings are no longer functional, but go back home. On the other hand, we'll have to see how this develops, and obviously if bright and capable Ukrainians decide to leave Ukraine or can't stay in Ukraine because the Russians take their homes, and it'd be good to have good people working in Woodland Hills. Let's give the results of the last question. For the Polish plan to deliver the MiGs, 30, correction. Yes is 48%, no is 17%, unsure is 35%. Let's do another survey question, and this is also about Ukraine and also has some background. The world burns about 98 million barrels of oil a day, and Russia produces 7.8 million. The price of oil is what economists would call elastic. That is to say, if you just have produced in the world 5% more oil than the world has a use for, the price goes down. And if instead the amount of oil being produced is just 5% less than what people want to use, the price goes up a lot, certainly more than 5%. Now, as a result of our sanctions, Russia, which used to export 7.8 million barrels, is exporting 5 million barrels a day on the top of the table. And they're using sneaky devices to sell another million barrels a day under the table. And the good news there is what they sell under the table, they have to take like a 1/3 discount already in order to be able to sell. So the Europeans, and some in America, do not want to see a further reduction in the amount of Russian oil that's in the world market. On the other hand, we have the financial power to drive down further the amount of oil that Russia is able to export using sanctions against banks, etc. As a matter of fact, all the banks we haven't sanctioned because that would reduce Russian oil exports. So the question here is, should we use all our financial power to decrease further the amount of oil that Russia is able to export, knowing that that will have an effect on world oil prices and the price at the pump? If you think we should do a lot more to reduce Russia oil exports, push 1 for yes. If you don't think we should do so, press 2 for no. And if you're undecided or unsure, press 3. With that, let's take another question from the floor.
Okay, moving back to non-Ukraine question. Mark from Sherman Oaks, environmental question, climate change, Green New Deal, I believe. Mark, you are on now.
Hi there, Congressman. Thank you so much for taking my question.
Thank you.
Yeah, my question is about, in your town hall reminder email yesterday, you wrote at length about your environmental bona fides and credentials, which is great. But to my knowledge, you have not co-sponsored the Green New Deal for public schools, the Green New Deal for public housing, or I believe the Green New Deal for cities and states, all of which take the necessary steps to transition us away from fossil fuels and invest in protecting our climate for us and for future generations. Your re-election campaigns have also accepted approximately $250,000 from weapons manufacturers and over $5 million from Wall Street and big banks, all of whom rake in an enormous profit off of the extraction of fossil fuels. So my question is, how can we expect you to be the leader that we need when it comes to combating climate change and expeditiously, transitioning us away from fossil fuels when you rely so heavily on companies and individuals who are so deeply invested in the fossil fuel industry?
I don't know where you get those numbers. There are over 100 bills pending that have been introduced over the last several years designed to pull us away from fossil fuels. And I have worked on many and co-sponsored many. You've identified a few that I have not co-sponsored. As to the idea that any entity in our economy is reliant to some degree on fossil fuels, that's true. I drive a car. You drive a car. And so you could say, well, Sherman, you took a contribution from a credit union executive, and the credit unions loan money for cars. And that is true. The fact is that we as a society are users of fossil fuels, and as environmentalists are trying to get away from that. And we have to do that one step at a time. But I voted for the carbon tax clear back in the 1990s when the vast majority of Democrats, particularly in the Senate, would not do so. So I do think that I do drive a car. I can't afford a Tesla, but I do deal with a lot of other people who drive cars, who make car loans, who sell cars, and that's got to apply to other fossil fuel uses as well. But I thank you. I thank you for your question, and I don't think you'll find many members from Southern California who have as long and deep a record on environmentalism as I do, in part because I've been doing it for such a long time. With that, let's go on to the next question.
All right, Congressman, we have a back to Ukraine. We have Estelle. I don't know where she's calling from, but Estelle, you are on now.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. In light of the previous caller, I wanted to loop back to him asking you about Israel, and you're talking about your support for Israel. And I wonder about your support for Palestinian human beings. There's two people that live in the land that some call Israel and some call Palestine. And I would love to hear you talk about your support for the millions of Palestinians who have been living under military occupation for decades in conditions that every major human rights organization, both Israeli and American and international, have now written reports to show how it meets the definition of apartheid.
Well, it's certainly Israel is certainly not an apartheid state, and in fact, that has been rejected by, for example, a minister who serves in the Israeli government who is Palestinian by ethnicity. I guess you could say Holland is an apartheid state because there's a border around Holland, and it's drawn so as to include those people who are Dutch and not to include the people who are German, who are on the other side of the border. Denmark, the border there is drawn to include Danes and to exclude non-Danes. And ultimately, Israel, every country, especially in the modern world, has minority groups. But Israel is a homeland for the Jewish people and needs borders between itself and an independent Palestinian state. The problem is that Palestinian leaders have been, decade after decade, unwilling to reach a peace settlement in which they would get an independent state. What you see instead is, and you saw that President Sadat of Egypt reached out to try to create peace and then was assassinated by the enemies of peace. And since then, very few Arab leaders have been willing to step forward. The fact is that the position of Hamas is that all Jews must be ethnically cleansed from the Middle East, from the river, the Jordan River, to the sea. Palestine shall be free, and the Middle East shall be Juden-free. The position of the Palestinian Authority is more nebulous, but they take the position that any Arabic-speaking person who claims that they or any of their ancestors ever lived in the Holy Land has the right to move there with their entire extended family. So while on occasion you get the Palestinian Authority saying they're for two states, it's only with the understanding that they both be Arab states. Does the Israeli government occasionally make mistakes? Everyone does. And you can certainly, researching the activities of 7 million people, find this or that mistake. But the real problem here is the unwillingness of the Palestinian side to accept a two-state solution, and really their demand for the ethnic cleansing of all Jews from the Holy Land. And that's why you've seen so many Arab leaders even depart from that position and say, look, we're just going to have a reasonable relationship with Israel. It's a country in our region, And we can't wait for the day when those anti-Semites who hate all Jews worldwide, or at least just hate the existence of Jews in the Middle East, finally get over it. We're just going to go ahead and have a relationship with Israel. And you saw that with the Abrahamic Accords just a week or so ago. So I very much look forward to peace in the area and two states. And I don't think it's apartheid to say that you have a border between one country and another drawn so that the Dutch are on one side and the Germans are on the other. Let's go to the next question. Should we use financial power to decrease oil exports from Russia? Yes, 70%. No, 10%. Unsure, 20%. We have an audience here that I think has been inspired by the Ukrainian people and is willing to pay the costs and take the risks involved in providing as much assistance to Ukraine as we can. Let's see. We'll go to one more survey question. Do you approve of President Biden's performance as president so far? So this is not just Ukraine, across the board. If you approve of what he's of his performance as president, press 1. Disapprove 2. Unsure 3. Let's go on to the next question from the floor.
All right, Congressman, it's Ryan from Studio City who has a question about the NATO resolution the House considered the other day. Ryan, you are live now.
Thanks for taking the call. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, there was a House resolution expressing support for NATO and principles of democracy. Could you comment on that, and what does it mean, if anything, and then maybe comment on the fact that so many of your colleagues didn't support it?
Well, Trump was somewhat hostile to NATO. All of the recent U.S. presidents have been calling upon NATO countries to spend more on their own defense. The person who's been most eloquent at that has been Vladimir Putin. And as a result of this invasion, you're seeing major increases in German and other European expenditures. But it's one thing to urge European countries to spend more on their own defense. It's another thing to take kind of the anti-NATO hostile rhetoric that we saw in the last administration. Unfortunately, there's certainly, to some degree in the Republican Party, a belief that, well, whatever Trump says we're supposed to do today, that's what we're going to do. And so you're talking about a resolution that was mostly, an expression of opinion of the opinion of the House. It wasn't a major piece of legislation that expressed our support for the principles of NATO, and I believe it passed by quite a margin. But it's unfortunate some people voted against it. Let's go on to the next question.
Okay, Congressman, the next question is from Ralph. I don't know where you're calling from, Ralph, but you are on now.
Thank you for taking my question, Congressman Sherman, and thank you for your service to our nation.
And Ralph, what town do you live in?
I live in Northridge.
And
I appreciated the written communications you sent in preparation for this, and lots of things on there that are worth talking about. But the one that I want to pick up on are the recent laws against abortion passed in Texas, and I think it's Mississippi, the most recent one, right? Or it's on the dock. So I believe that what you've advocated for is a woman's right to choose, and I support that too. But as a physician, I think that abortion should be considered from the perspective of a medical procedure, and I think that I wondered if you would be willing to be one one person in Congress or at a high level of our government who would take a different approach besides the pushing back and forth about a woman's right to choose, which I support and I think is valid, but it doesn't seem to be working to stop these people and take another angle, which is the medical angle, and that is to consider whether to look into the fact that internationally laws against abortion do not decrease the rate of abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, what they do is they shift the ratio of legal versus illegal abortions. The latter sort, of course, having the same outcome for the, unfortunate fetus, right? But more often harming or killing the woman. And that, of course, has a lot of cultural factors and things like that. But I wonder if you
what does
look at it
reduce
look at it a different way. Mm-hmm.
What reduces the number of abortions is the availability of contraception and the availability of basic sex education. And those are things that I've always supported and had sometimes wonder when you see someone who speaks against abortion, then opposes the sex education or the distribution of contraception that would reduce the number of abortions. If a woman wants to terminate a pregnancy, there are now 3 ways to do so. Do so in your own town. Go somewhere else if, God forbid, abortion services are not available in your town. Or use the relatively new pharmaceuticals, which I don't think any of these state laws is going to be effective in preventing the distribution. And all 3 of these choices ought to be available to women. Of course, in Oklahoma, that may not be the case. And it is, we're going to have to see what the Supreme Court does. Roe v. Wade was correctly decided. And hopefully the Supreme Court will have, clearly a majority of the Supreme Court would not have voted for Roe v. Wade had they been there at the time. But hopefully the justices have enough respect for precedent that they will enforce the Roe v. Wade approach. If they don't, then women in Oklahoma are either going to have to rely on pharmaceuticals, get an illegal abortion in Oklahoma, or travel some distance. And for some that will be easy, and for some it will not. So I couldn't agree more that abortion is a medical service, like so many other medical services, that ought to be available. For poor women, it ought to be available under Medicaid, the same way that other medical services are. And we'll hope that the Supreme Court sticks with its precedent. I think, we have the results of the last on Biden's approval. We've got 69% approve, 23% disapprove, 8% unsure. That is only a little less than the last time we asked that question, which I believe was our March town hall. And while I'm mentioning a prior town hall, let me remind people of our upcoming town hall on the 27th of this month. And you can dial in at 855-920-0548 at 7 p.m. on April 27th. I think we have time for, if I can keep my answers relatively short, 2 more questions. Tell you what, we'll take one question from the floor, then we may take one more RSVP question.
All right, Congressman, one more question about Ukraine, and it's from Joyce. Joyce, you're on now.
I had asked my question earlier about the red line, and I don't think we got really an answer from you, Congressman, about the sentiment in the Congress about what we're watching and what we're not going to do and how long we can take that position. And are we really anticipating a threat of nuclear or chemical attacks?
I don't know if you've asked that question before. This is the first I've heard it from you, but obviously people want to know. Oh, the red line is NATO territory. The fuzziest part of the line is cyber. We have over hundreds of years developed international law about territorial integrity, etc., dealing with borders, and almost all the wars are fought about somebody crossing a border. Cyber is something that our international law has yet to really catch up with, or international doctrines. Another area that is vague is what level of atrocity taking place outside of NATO territory would be so severe that the United States would get directly involved. And you mentioned, for example, the use of chemical weapons. So at this point, I think the only line we have where American troops would shoot Russians would be an invasion over the physical border of a NATO state. That being said, we will be sending weapons as quickly as we can to Ukraine, subject to, as we've discussed here, there's arguments inside the Biden administration on planes and tanks and similar larger systems. I very much hope and expect that the tanks will be getting to Ukraine soon. Let's see. We now have an RSVP question that I'll deal with as quickly as I can from Deborah Reynolds, who says, I would like to know if you plan to give input concerning the appointment of the FAA director. And she talks about noise and air pollution with the next-gen system that the FAA has imposed. Absolutely yes. 19 of us have come together under what we call the Quiet Skies Caucus, not to be confused with Quiet Skies organizations locally in the Valley, to say that the president must appoint someone who's not just focused on the airline industry, but is focused on reducing the noise pollution, that we focus particularly on the Metroplex new system, which has brought an intolerable amount of noise to Studio City and to a number of other Valley neighborhoods. I have supported a package of legislation designed to reduce airport noise, including the Restore Everyone Sleep Tonight Act, which authorizes each airport to have a curfew. People don't realize even the airport owners are not allowed to impose a curfew under the present pro-airline statutes that exist in the United States. Also, the Quiet Communities Act, which would create inside the EPA, because the FAA is somewhat captured by the airlines. So it's the EPA where the tradition is to fight for the environment, where we need an office of noise abatement. And finally, I pushed for and got a GAO study of noise levels in the San Fernando Valley. The GAO reported that the FAA's measure of noise does not provide a clear picture of the noise levels at different locations. That's why I've joined in introducing the Decrease Noise Level Act. We do have a week curfew at Burbank, 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. We have a much stronger curfew, but still some exceptions for law enforcement, etc. 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. out of Van Nuys. But we'd like to be able to live our lives both day and night without the truly excessive amount of noise that is coming from both Burbank and Van Nuys airports. Our vendor charges us a whole lot more if I go more than roughly one more minute. So I'm going to invite people to listen to the tone that you'll hear and the voicemail system. And please leave your email address even if I already have it, because I'm not allowed to send you emails unless I get your email address from you. At least I'm not allowed to send you emails at some times and in some ways unless I get the email address from you, and I want to send you a reminder of the April 27th town hall. You can RSVP to that town hall at bradsherman.house.gov. You can express an opinion or leave a comment or a question on the voicemail system. I'm not going to listen tonight, but I will listen tomorrow, and we'll keep in touch. I look forward to flying to the San Fernando Valley on Friday and to seeing as many people out there as we can. I want to once again voice my thanks to the ambassador for joining us, and I want to thank thousands of Valley residents for spending their evening with us as well. Thank you very much. This is Congressman Brad Sherman.